welcome to the Podium Pod, the podcast covering the 2023 FIBA World Cup across Japan, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Brought to you by The Pick and Roll. Head to pickandroll.com.au and subscribe for in-depth commentary and analysis on Aussie hoops. We have the second of our 4 group preview shows. I'm joined once again by the Pick and Roll's Ben Malice. Ben, fresh off your interview with Gazy at the weekend, and now we get to actually talk about the World Cup.
I know, let's talk some hoops. As much as I could have Andrew Gaze took my ear off all day, I think we need to get into the games and talk about our friends in America.
Well, we got a very exciting Group C. I'm going to go through them in order, and no surprise that we start with the US. They're ranked second in the world. Of course, they finished first in their group last time. They have a headline by Brandon Ingram, Anthony Edwards, Tyrese Halliburton, Jalen Brunson. But I want to talk to you about the big man rotation. It's something we've alluded to in the past. Jaren Jackson Jr., the reigning Defensive Player of the Year in the NBA, Walker Kessler, one of the contenders for Rookie of the Year, and Bobby Portis, who hasn't really done anything aside from be a role player on a Milwaukee Bucks championship team. It's a questionable rotation. They're going to come up against some big players in this tournament. Are they going to be able to match the size and the strength?
It's the biggest doubt in this team, isn't it? And the biggest comment I'll make about Triple J is that he struggles with foul trouble in the NBA when the whistle is a lot more generous than FIBA play. Again, as Australians, we've got many a tale about FIBA refs and their ticky-tack foul calls. So that's the biggest concern, and it's legit because I can see it happening in a big high-leverage game in the knockout round where Triple J picks up 3 fouls in the second half, and then you're either having to play Kessler in the middle. I don't think Bobby Portis is the answer, and it's just going to leave them having to play small. So it's definitely the biggest weakness on this team. It's teams like France and Spain and even Australia. It's a massive opportunity to attack because, they've got Triple J, who is the best defensive big man in the world. But if he goes down and gets some foul trouble, then they're very tender inside. And I think it's going to be a very hard game for them to win at those pointy ends if Triple J isn't playing big minutes.
And of course, recently we had the USA Select team run them off the floor in the first few scrimmages when they played Cam Johnson at the 4, switched out Cam Johnson for Anthony Edwards, and all of a sudden it flipped on its head. So a lot is resting on the shoulders of Brandon Ingram and Anthony Edwards to score and score in bunches in this tournament. Brandon Ingram's probably going to have to play a bit of the 4 himself. So he may in fact start at the 4 as their best 5-man lineup. So they're going to be exploited by bigger power forwards. And there's a couple in this group that we'll talk about in a second that are really going to give them fits, I feel. They're going to have to play 2 of Kessler, Portis, and Jaren Jackson Jr. to be able to go with these other big power forwards.
It is. I think, though, this group is a good test case for them because that issue withstanding, they're still going to cruise through this group. They should still go undefeated. I can't see them losing a game. And it's going to give Steve Kerr a chance to just test out what lineup rotations he has. Again, take a team like New Zealand. The talent gap is obvious, but we know New Zealand is going to be physical. They're going to muck up the game. They're going to try to irritate the Americans and play with physicality. And that's a good test case for them because they're going to need to find small ball units that, again, we're talking about Brandon Ingram playing the 4. Like, he's still a very long athlete. He still has a lot of size. So we're not talking about slender players here. Yeah. It's just that I'm thinking ahead to the Rudy Goberts of the world, or even something like Jock Landale with all of his movement and his flow. If they get that far and face off against Australia, that's going to be the issue. But in this group, they should have enough to get through. And you mentioned Anthony Edwards there. For me, he's the name to watch because he has a lot of swagger and he is an amazing player. But America might just have to rein him in a little bit because you don't want Anthony Edwards jacking up 20 shots a night. That's not how this team is going to win. They need to be moving the ball and beating teams with the pass.
Well, they're going to share the group with Greece, who are ranked 9th in the world. They finished 2nd in their group last time. Now, the big question mark is going to be on Giannis Antetokounmpo. He recently had clean-up surgery, I think, in his knee, Ben. So that's I don't see him playing in this tournament at all.
No, I think if it was any other athlete alive, he would have been ruled out of this tournament already. But Giannis seems to be an alien. I remember what he did coming back for the finals 2 years ago. So maybe he is wanting to play in this tournament. But I tend to agree with a big NBA season coming up. I can't see Giannis playing. And it's a shame because the Greeks with him were probably slated to be the second team and cruise into that spot in the group. But without Giannis, it opens the door for Jordan and even New Zealand to potentially pull the upset there and get into second spot.
Well, Greece will still have Kostas Papanikolaou, who had a
Great name.
cup of coffee in the NBA, and they'll also have Georgios Papagiannis, who is 7 feet 3 inches tall. So, you know, Walker Kessler is going to have his hands full with Papagiannis. Triple J is probably going to pick up 3 fouls in the first quarter against the big man. 7 feet 3, 121 kilos. Good luck to that smaller US front line. So, you know, they've got a guy named Thomas Walkup who had a really good qualifying game recently. And they've got a couple of, NBA or former NBA players, including Giannis's brother, Thanasis. So they've got some talent on this roster, and they've also got Costas, of course. So you can't forget the third brother. There's every chance that Greece could pull an upset on the US if the cards fall the right way. It's highly unlikely, but you never know if those big men get into trouble and all of a sudden you've got a 7'3" guy with a 6'8" guy on him, then there might be some real problems.
Yeah, I think there might be a problem if the US take their eye off the ball, which again, they are prone to doing in these group stage games. I can see them being quite ugly. And again, you mentioned all that size and strength that the Greek team has, I can see these games getting played in the 60s, or anyway, Greece trying to do that and dragging America down to that slower pace, more physical style of game, But again, the American shot making is going to be too much. But just to hope with Greece that they can get their players out there and at least give some competitive games in this group and at least add a bit of spice into what is normally a very quiet part of the tournament, with America normally cruising through their group.
Well, a team that won't back down and that we know a lot about is New Zealand. They're ranked 26th in the world. They finished third in Group F last time, so shared a group with Greece. They're headlined by a series of NBL and ex-NBL talent. Of course, the Webster brothers, Corey and Ty, no relation. Shea Ili, Finn Delaney, Yanni Wetzel, and Isaiah Liafa are also on that squad, among others. Walter Brown, my Tasmania Jack Jumper development player, is also at the end of the bench there for the Tall Blacks. I mean, this is a competitive team with guys that play in the second best league in the world, Ben. You can't count them out. Particularly against Greece and Jordan, they've got every chance of potentially knocking off one or both of those teams and sneaking into the second round.
Yeah, well, if I'm New Zealand, I'm expecting to beat Jordan. That is the benchmark for them at this tournament in my eyes. They need to be getting a win. And if they can pull that game out against Jordan, then it means that game against Greece is a winner advance game. And so that's where this New Zealand team needs to be targeting. And I think it's realistic for them. Now, I'm not saying they're definitely going to beat Greece or they should be favoured, because they won't, but they need to give them themselves the chance of advancing through the group. And you mentioned all of the NBL players on that team. We obviously know them better than most, given that they play in our local league, but there's enough shot making there. There's enough size there to put out good rotations and push Greece and beat Jordan. So out of this entire group, that's the one game for me, Greece versus New Zealand, that is the best or has the most riding on it. And you mentioned 4 years ago, they got to see this team up close. They know what they're going up against. And it should give them a leg up, especially like we just said, if Giannis isn't on the plane to Manila.
So the last team in Group C is Jordan. They're ranked 33rd in the world. They finished last in Group G at the previous World Cup. They're headlined by Dar Tucker, who's 35 years old and even had a stint in the D-League back when it was the D-League for the Los Angeles Defenders. I remember when they introduced the D-League and then it got rebranded very quickly to the G-League, Ben. That was a long, long time ago. And a 35-year-old guy, this is obviously his swan song.
It gives me hope. I'm younger than him, so I might have a chance of getting into the next World Cup. That's a amazing story, isn't it? And I also remember when it was called the D-League and Gatorade came along and chucked a bunch of money at the NBA and changed the name. So, again, it's a good opportunity for him to get to another World Cup. I can't see Jordan doing an awful lot in this group, but I'm sure they're looking at New Zealand and Greece without Giannis and thinking the same thing we just spoke about with New Zealand before, that they've got an opportunity to pull the upset. Although I did check our friends at Sportsbet beforehand, and the odds of Jordan getting anywhere near this group are not great. So I wouldn't hold out hope.
The US have done pretty well with this group, I'd say. Greece without Giannis, New Zealand will be competitive, but not on the level of the US, and Jordan the same. So I can definitely see the US cruising through. Who for you is most likely to take that second spot?
It is Greece. I think New Zealand will give them a closer game, and it will be tight without Giannis there, assuming that's the way it falls. But Greece has too much talent, too much size. And they are a very powerful European basketball nation who would be expecting to advance out of the group. So I expect this one to go to chalk and the Americans to finish on top and the Greeks to finish in second place.
Have to agree with you, although I will be pulling for New Zealand in that game against Greece, so they sneak past. It would be great to have two Oceania teams in the second round.
It will. And if New Zealand can somehow get into the second round, I'll be able to go see them when I get to Manila for the second round. So selfishly, I'm right there with you, and let's go New Zealand. Let's pull the upset. Don't normally say that as an Australian, but let's go New Zealand.
I think because we're pretty safe in our own group, we probably feel more comfortable.
Well, let's hope that. Let's hope we're not jinxing that. Otherwise, we've got some massive troubles.
Now, Group D is headlined by Lithuania, who are also missing arguably their best player in Domantas Sabonis, who recently had wrist surgery after a big year with the Sacramento Kings. They will have Jonas Valanciunas, however, who's a veteran of that team at this point. I own his 2012 Olympic jersey, Ben. That's probably one of my most obscure jersey purchases.
Where did you collect that one from?
From London, funnily enough.
Very nice.
While I was over there, but yeah, that's one of my prized possessions, and you know, the first name that comes to mind whenever I think of Lithuania is Sarunas Jaskevicius, who played for my beloved Pacers for a period of time, and is a basketball god there in Lithuania. But the absence of Domantas Sabonis pretty much throws this group wide open for me, even though, you know, Jonas is a great veteran and probably will play very strongly, and they'll probably end up finishing top. But there's enough doubt in my mind with Domas missing the tournament.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, that Lithuania is the best team in this group. Valanciunas is the best player. And I have to remind myself of this sometimes, that I always think of the versions of the players we see in the NBA, and you think of Valanciunas as a good big man that plays a role on the Pelicans now. But when it gets to FIBA play like this, he's going to be playing 35 minutes a night and putting up 25 and 15 type box scores. Exactly what Patty Mills does for us. So he is going to be enough to dominate this group. And they've also got Monty Eunice, who's playing on that team still. So Lithuania, like what I said before about Greece, but even better, they're a very proud European basketball nation that looks at these tournaments and expects to get into the knockout round. So that does bring them some pressure, and there are the expectations on them above everyone else in this group. But I suspect they're going to have too much, and they'll be able to get the job done and advance into the second round.
Montenegro is also in Group D. They're headlined by Nikola Vucevic, another all-star big man from the NBA. They're ranked 18 overall, and they finished last in their previous World Cup grouping. But for Montenegro, I mean, they've got a big man that can match it with Jonas. Clearly don't have the talent down the rest of the list. But, you know, if Vucevic goes off, then they could have a great night.
Yeah, and Vucevic really is the perfect FIBA big man. Offensively, he's got that soft touch, the skill set that, especially with the shorter three-point line at FIBA play, he can space the floor, and it allows them to get a more of a plodding inside presence to pair with him. And then defensively, the size that he has is going to be enough to go against Valanciunas and at least make an effort. So I can actually see Vucevic going nuts in this group and scoring a lot of points, and we might look up after 3 or 4 days and see that he's leading the tournament in scoring. So Montenegro, like what we said before about Greece, actually, they're in that spot where they're second in the group, and they'll be expecting to get through, probably not to beat Lithuania, but they'll be expecting to beat Egypt and Mexico, who we'll speak about in a minute, and slide into the second round.
So Mexico ranked 31st overall in the world. We've got a couple of sort of lower level teams in this particular grouping that are past the 30 mark. So you wouldn't expect them to make too much noise, but you never know. I mean, Mexico have Israel Gutierrez and potentially Juan Toscano Anderson from the NBA as well. So, you know, there's a little bit of talent there. And as we keep saying through these group previews, a guy just has to catch fire. A team just has to catch fire, and they're fully capable of beating anyone.
Yeah, and a bit of a tangent here, but we're watching the Soccer World Cup going at the moment, right, where there's upsets happening all over the place.
Yeah.
And that's a very good reminder ahead of what is another World Cup happening in the basketball world in a couple of weeks, that it doesn't take much at this level to pull an upset. And we see it with Egypt and Mexico. Whoever wins that game is one upset away from getting into the second round. And Montenegro is probably the team that they'll be targeting. And Mexico just needs to attack the Egypt game, win that as best as they can. The exact same thing applies to Egypt in reverse. and it just gives them a chance to pull the upset and slide out of this group. Do I think it's going to happen? No, but it's eminently possible. And there will be a surprise or two in this tournament. We just have to wait and see where that's going to come from.
And the final team for Group D is Egypt. They're ranked 55th overall. They didn't make the last World Cup. They're led by shooting guard Amir Abdelrahim and point guard Ihab Amin Saleh. So they're 55th overall. They've obviously made the World Cup. And I keep saying this through these group previews. If you've made it this far, then you're fully capable of winning a game in this tournament. If the cards fall as they may. With that being said, this Egyptian team is in a tough group for them. They're unlikely to get over Lithuania. They're unlikely to get over Montenegro. So the Mexican game will be the one that may be the most competitive for them.
Yeah, and that's the duality of professional sport at this level, right? We both know that Egypt has no chance of progressing into the medal rounds. But if they can win one game, if they can push Mexico and pull the upset, that's enough to keep this program moving forward. And it's something for them to build off. So again, that's the most interesting game in this group from a sheer drama point of view is probably Mexico versus Egypt, because in the big picture, it has nothing riding on it. But for these two teams and whether they're going to look at this tournament as a success, it's a must win for both sides. And that's the drama that you can bring to these World Cups and what I'm sure that Egyptian team will be bringing when they get to Manila.
Well, it could be the difference with government funding for the sport in the future, facilities in the future, opportunities to go on overseas tours. Like, one win in a World Cup could make all the difference for one of these sides.
Yeah, and it's a very valid point when you look at funding compared to other sports as well. Like, for example, I know Egypt is trying to bid for a future soccer World Cup.
Yeah.
Well, you need to compete with that from like we see it here with all our sports here, that the professional teams, these wins in these big tournaments, it gets politicians on board, it gets the media on board, and that is how you drive change through money. So it's a very good point that applies to everyone at this tournament. You're not just playing for the wins and losses. These are transformative moments in the history of all the programs.
So is anyone getting past Lithuania and Montenegro for the top two placings in this group, Ben?
No, I can't see it. I expect Lithuania to go through undefeated and then Montenegro to handle Egypt and Mexico with relative ease. So again, another group that looks like it's going to go to plan, at least in my mind anyway, and those top two teams should advance into the second round.
I'm in complete agreement. Ben, thanks so much for joining me for Group C and D.
Anytime, Adam.
That was the Podium Pod, the podcast covering the 2023 FIBA World Cup. Brought to you by the Pick and Roll. Head to pickandroll.com.au and subscribe for in-depth commentary and analysis on Aussie hoops. We'll see you again next time.